A luxury car breaks down in the middle of a busy avenue, and the chaos becomes a spectacle when its powerful owner loses control of the situation. At the height of the confusion, a grease-stained boy offers to help, drawing laughter and contempt from the businessman. Driven by pride, the man accepts the challenge, never imagining what is about to happen. Minutes later, the engine roars back to life, and with it begins the transformation of a man who thought he had seen it all. If this story interests you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you are watching from. Let's continue. Tuesday afternoon in New York City began like every other in the life of Robert Miller. Appointments scheduled with military precision, strategic meetings set hour by hour, and the unwavering certainty that everything would go exactly as planned. At 53, Robert had built an empire in the automotive industry. His company, Miller Motors, was synonymous with luxury, status, and power. He didn't just sell cars, he sold dreams. Expensive dreams, inaccessible to most, but which fed the egos of those who could afford them. That afternoon, Robert was driving his imported sedan, an exclusive model that cost as much as a townhouse in an upscale neighborhood. The leather seats exuded sophistication, the digital dashboard responded to the slightest touch, and the hum of the engine was almost imperceptible, like the whisper of a promise kept. He was driving down Fifth Avenue, one of the city's busiest arteries, heading to another meeting with international investors. Everything was going perfectly until, without warning, without a signal, without explanation, the car simply stopped. The engine died in the middle of the center lane. The silence inside the vehicle contrasted with the chaos beginning to form around it. Robert turned the key. Nothing. He pressed the ignition button. Nothing. He tried again, harder, as if the intensity of the gesture could solve the problem. Nothing. Behind him, horns began to blare. First one, then two, then a deafening chorus of impatience and outrage. Cars swerved sharply, drivers shouted out of windows, and curses echoed in the hot afternoon air. Robert felt sweat begin to trickle down his forehead. It wasn't the heat. It was something worse. It was humiliation. He, Robert Miller, the man who controlled one of the largest automakers in the country, was stuck in the middle of Fifth Avenue like a novice who didn't know how to shift gears. He tried to call his own company's technical assistance, but the call dropped. He tried again. The line was busy. The irony was cruel. Outside, people began to stop. Some took photos. Others filmed. Social media was already buzzing before Robert even realized the scale of the disaster. A luxury car stalled in traffic was just a nuisance. A Miller Motors luxury car stalled in traffic was a scandal. And everyone wanted to record that moment. The gridlock stretched for blocks. Couriers zipped by, honking. Pedestrians stopped on the sidewalks to watch the show, and Robert felt that every second inside was an eternity. He unbuttoned his shirt collar, loosened his Italian tie, but nothing relieved the tightness in his chest. Frustration gave way to rage. How could this be happening to him? It was then that he heard a soft tap on the window. Robert turned his head, prepared to dismiss any meddlesome onlooker, but what he saw made him even angrier. It was a boy. He couldn't have been more than 12 years old. Thin, wearing simple worn-out clothes, his arms stained with grease, his face sweaty, and his dark eyes fixed on the businessman. The boy made a gesture with his hand, asking him to roll down the window. Robert hesitated. He was used to dealing with executives, investors, and politicians, not grease-stained children in the middle of an avenue. But traffic wasn't moving, the heat was rising, and the crowd was growing. With a sigh of impatience, he lowered the glass a few inches. The boy didn't waste time. "I can fix it, sir. I know what the problem is." His voice was firm but low. There was no arrogance, only the certainty of someone who knew his craft well. Robert blinked, incredulous. "You what?" "I can fix the car. It's the solenoid valve in the injection system. It's stuck. I've seen it happen before." An ironic smile formed on Robert's lips. He looked around. A few people were watching the scene. A group of young people started laughing. A woman commented loudly, mocking the situation. Robert felt his pride boil. This kid thought he could fix an imported car, a model that most mechanics in the country didn't even understand properly. "Look here, kid. This car costs more than you'll earn. In your entire life. It's not a bicycle, it's not an old clunker. You have no idea what you're talking about. The boy didn't back down. I do know what I'm talking about. I work with my dad at his shop. We fix everything. New cars, old cars, imports. I can identify a defect just by the sound, and this car here is stuck because of the valve. If you let me try, I'll solve it. The audience grew. A few curious bystanders moved closer. Robert heard laughter in the background. He felt the weight of the stares, the pointed cell phones, the public exposure. He was cornered. He could stay there, trapped in his own pride, or he could accept this boy's proposal and risk looking like an even bigger fool. But anger spoke louder. Fine. You want to fix it? Then fix it. But if you can't, you run out of here and never show your face around me again. And if you do get it, I'll pay you. Deal? The boy nodded. Deal. Robert got out of the car, straightening his wrinkled suit and wiping his face with a pocket square. He stepped back a few paces, crossing his arms as he watched the boy open the hood with a confidence that bordered on the absurd. People around whispered to each other. Some laughed openly. Others took photos. Robert felt the humiliation burn deeper. This would be a headline, he was sure of it. Luke, the boy, looked at the engine with the same attention a surgeon would give to a delicate operation. He knew this type of car, not because he had worked on many, but because he studied. Every night, after helping his father at the shop, he spent hours reading technical manuals he found, in used bookstores or downloaded from the internet. He knew every part, every system, every weak point of the most sophisticated models. And that defect was a classic, a stuck solenoid valve. He just needed to release the pressure, adjust the position, and reactivate the circuit. He borrowed a screwdriver from a motorcycle messenger who had stopped to watch. He worked in silence, ignoring the mean comments, the laughter, and the taunts. His fingers moved with precision. He removed the cover, located the valve, adjusted the pressure, cleaned the contact point, and reconnected the system. It took less than 10 minutes. When he finished, Luke looked at Robert and said simply, "Ready, you can start it up." Robert frowned. That couldn't be right. It wasn't possible that a kid had solved in minutes what technical assistance would take hours to diagnose. But he got into the car, turned the key, and to his absolute shock the engine purred perfectly. The dashboard lit up, the systems responded, and the vehicle was running as if nothing had happened. The silence that followed was awkward. The laughter stopped. The mean comments turned into murmurs of surprise. Robert got out of the car slowly, looking at the boy with a mixture of disbelief and something he couldn't name. Shame? Admiration? Confusion? Luke closed the hood, wiped his hands on his already dirty pants, and waited. Robert took his wallet out of his pocket, pulled out several bills, and held them out to the boy. "You won, take it." Luke took the money, thanked him with a nod, and began to walk away. Robert stood there, frozen, as traffic began to flow again, as people returned to their lives, and as the episode turned into another viral video on social media. But something changed inside him at that moment. Something small, almost imperceptible, but it would begin to grow in the following days. He didn't know it yet, but that afternoon on Fifth Avenue would be the start of a transformation he never imagined possible. Luke, for his part, continued walking through the busy streets of New York, tucking the money into his pocket and thinking of only one thing: getting home and telling his father he had landed another job. To him, it was just another day, another challenge overcome, more proof that knowledge was worth more than any diploma hanging on a wall. Meanwhile, on social media, the video had already surpassed 100,000 views. The title read, "Boy humiliates millionaire businessman by fixing luxury car in the middle of Fifth Avenue." The comments were ruthless. Some defended the boy, others attacked Robert. The controversy was only beginning, and neither of them knew yet how much that encounter would change their lives forever. Night fell over New York with its blanket of blinking lights and distant sounds. Robert Miller was in his apartment on the Upper East Side, one of the most exclusive neighborhoods in the city, but for the first time in years he couldn't feel the usual comfort that place provided him. The glass walls revealed the city below, an ocean of lit-up buildings stretching as far as the eye could see. Normally, that view brought him satisfaction. It was visual proof of his success, of his ability to be literally above most people. But tonight everything felt different. He was sitting in an Italian leather armchair, a glass of scotch in hand, staring at his phone screen with an expression that mixed anger, shame, and something deeper he couldn't identify. The video now had over 2 million views. 2 million. In less than 12 hours, that scene on Fifth Avenue had become one of the most talked about topics on the American internet. The comments were merciless. A millionaire businessman humiliated by a child. This is the real world. Talent doesn't need a last name. This guy sells luxury cars but doesn't even know how to fix his own. Ridiculous. The boy deserves a scholarship, not a handout from an arrogant rich guy. Robert took another sip, feeling the liquid burn his throat. He had built a reputation over decades. He had turned Miller Motors into a national benchmark. He had closed international contracts, expanded factories, and generated jobs. And now, because of a mechanical failure and a kid who appeared out of nowhere, his image was being publicly shredded. He wanted to be furious. He wanted to blame the boy, blame the car, blame the universe. But deep down, there was something that bothered him even more. The memory of that boy's gaze. Luke hadn't shown arrogance. He hadn't mocked him. He hadn't shown off. He simply did the job, took the money, and left. There was a dignity in that which Robert couldn't ignore. And worse, there was a competence that he, with all his money and power, did not possess. That hurt in a way he wasn't used to feeling. His phone vibrated. It was a message from Mark Taylor, his oldest partner at Miller Motors. "Robert, we need to talk about the video. This is affecting the company's image. Shareholders are worried. Tomorrow morning in the boardroom. Let's resolve this before it turns into a bigger crisis." Robert sighed. Mark had always been pragmatic, calculating, obsessed with damage control and end-of-the-month numbers. They had been partners for 15 years, but Robert never felt there was a true friendship there. There was mutual interest, convenience, shared profit, nothing more. And now he knew Mark was less concerned with how Robert felt and more concerned with the financial impact of the situation. He turned off his phone, set the glass on the coffee table, and walked to the window. He leaned his forehead against the cold glass and closed his eyes. That was when the memory came. Inevitable, painful, devastating. The memory of Gabriel. Gabriel Miller, his son. 12 years old, dark hair, bright eyes full of curiosity about the world. He would have been exactly that boy's age now. Would have been. Because Gabriel was no longer here. 5 years ago, an accident took the boy's life abruptly, irreversibly, cruelly. Robert never recovered. He could never talk about it without feeling his chest tighten, without feeling like he couldn't breathe, without feeling that a part of him died along with his son. That was why the encounter with Luke had affected him so much. It wasn't just the public humiliation, it was the fact that, looking at that boy, Robert saw what Gabriel could have been. A smart, determined boy, full of life, and at the same time. He saw what he himself had never been, humble enough to learn from those beside him. Robert opened his eyes, took a deep breath, and made a decision. He didn't know what it meant yet, but he knew he couldn't just move on pretending nothing had happened. Something inside him had broken that afternoon, and perhaps it was time to start rebuilding. Meanwhile, on the other side of the city in Brooklyn, life went on in a completely different way. Smith & Son Auto Repair was silent that night. Tools were organized on the walls, cars awaiting repair rested. In the yard covered in grease and oil, and in the small makeshift office in the back, Anthony Smith was counting the bills his son had brought home. Anthony was a 42-year-old man, hands calloused by heavy labor, broad shoulders stooped by years of effort, and a tired gaze that carried the weight of someone who fought his whole life to support his family with dignity. He was proud of the shop. It wasn't big, it wasn't modern, it didn't have state-of-the-art equipment, but it was honest, it was his, and more importantly, it was the place where he was teaching his son everything he knew. "You did a good job today, Luke. This money will help pay the overdue bills." Anthony smiled, but there was a subtle sadness in that smile. He knew his son's talent was worth much more than small repairs on stalled cars in the street. He knew Luke deserved bigger opportunities, a better education, a broader future. But their financial reality didn't allow for big dreams. Luke was sitting on an old stool, flipping through a technical manual he had bought at a thrift store. "Dad, do you think one day we could expand the shop, like get new equipment, hire more people, do more complex repairs?" Anthony sighed. He wanted to say yes. He wanted to promise his son that everything would get better, that effort would be rewarded, that talent would be recognized. But he was a realist. Life had taught him not to create expectations he couldn't meet. "Maybe one day, son, but for now, we do what we can with what we have. And you're doing very well. Better than I was at your age, for sure." Luke smiled, but didn't push. He understood the limitations. He understood that money was tight, that opportunities were rare, and that the world outside didn't make it easy for people like them. But he also knew he had a gift. He could understand machines in a way few could. He could identify problems that experienced mechanics took hours to diagnose, and he wondered secretly if one day that would be enough to change their lives. What neither of them knew was that the viral video was about to change everything. On social media, journalists began to investigate who that boy was. Local news profiles began to share the story. People started asking, "Where does he study? Who is his father? Why is such a talented child working in the street instead of being in a high-quality technical school?" Public outcry grew, and with it came attention. Attention that could be a blessing or a curse, depending on who decided to get involved. The next day, Robert woke up early, as always, but unlike other mornings, he couldn't concentrate on emails, spreadsheets, or financial reports. His mind constantly returned to that boy. He picked up his phone and, for the first time, watched the video from start to finish. He watched himself mocking Luke. He watched the crowd's reaction. He watched the moment the engine came back to life and the awkward silence that followed. And for the first time, Robert felt shame, genuine shame. He dressed, ate breakfast without an appetite, and headed to the Miller Motors headquarters. The glass and steel building gleamed under the morning sun, imposing, modern, a symbol of corporate success. Robert stepped into the private elevator and went straight to the top floor, where the executive boardroom was located. Mark was already there, along with 2 other directors and the public relations team. "Robert, good morning. Let's get straight to the point." Mark opened a tablet and showed graphs, social media sentiment analysis, and brand impact projections. "The video is generating a wave of criticism against the company. People are associating Miller Motors with elitism, arrogance, and a disconnection from reality. We need to act fast. My suggestion is that you record a public apology, reinforcing the company's commitment to social inclusion and perhaps making a donation to institutions that work with underprivileged children." Robert listened in silence. He knew that game, damage control, PR, turning a scandal into a marketing opportunity, but this time, something inside him rejected that approach. He didn't want to turn this into an image play. He wanted to do something real, something that mattered. "No." The answer came firm, surprising everyone in the room. "I'm not going to record a video apologizing just to save the company's image. I'm going to do something different. I'm going to find that boy. I'm going to learn his story. And I'm going to help for real, not for the cameras, not for social media, because it's the right thing to do." Mark frowned. "Robert, with all due respect, that isn't sensible. You don't know this kid. You don't know his family. It could be a trap. It could generate more problems. Let the PR team handle this. They know what they're doing." Robert stood up, straightened his jacket, and looked directly at Mark. "I know what I'm doing, Mark. And this time, I'm going to do it my way. The meeting is adjourned." With that, Robert walked out of the room, leaving behind a tense silence and confused looks. He knew that decision could have consequences. He knew he was going against the cold business logic he had always followed. But for the first time in a long time, he felt he was doing something worthwhile, something Gabriel would have approved of. He went back to his car, now running perfectly, and typed into his phone's GPS. Smith & Son Auto Repair, Brooklyn, New York. The route appeared on the screen. 40 minutes away. 40 minutes that would separate two completely different worlds, and Robert was about to cross that border for the first time in his life. Brooklyn was a place Robert Miller knew only by name and financial reports. He knew it was home to merchants, small factories, mechanic shops, and an intense movement of people working hard to make a living. But he had never actually set foot on those streets. As he drove his imported sedan through the narrow, busy roads, he noticed the curious looks the car attracted. It was an object out of place there, a symbol of wealth amidst the simplicity of working-class life. Robert felt the contrast on his skin, and for the first time in a long time, it bothered him. The GPS indicated he had reached his destination. Robert parked in front of an old building with peeling walls, a faded sign that read Smith & Son Auto Repair, and a half-open rusty iron gate. He got out of the car slowly, adjusted his jacket, and took a deep breath. He didn't know exactly what he was going to say. He didn't have a prepared script. He just knew he needed to be there. As soon as he walked through the gate, he saw Luke crouching beside an old car, a wrench in hand, concentrated on loosening a stubborn bolt. The boy didn't see him immediately. Robert stood still for a few seconds, watching. There was something pure about that scene. The boy worked with dedication, ignoring the heat, the dirt, and the discomfort. He was completely immersed in what he was doing, and that sparked a silent admiration in Robert. Luke finally looked up, and seeing the businessman standing there, his eyes widened. He dropped the tool and stood up quickly, wiping his dirty hands on his shirt. "Sir? What are you doing here?" Robert took a step forward, trying to look less intimidating than he usually was. "I came to find you, Luke. I wanted to talk to you, and to your father if possible." Luke hesitated, clearly surprised. "My dad is inside, in the office. But sir, if it's because of the video, I wasn't to blame for anything. I just fixed the car. I didn't mean to cause trouble." Robert shook his head. "No, it's not that. You didn't cause any trouble. In fact, you showed me something I needed to see for a long time. Can I talk to your father?" Luke nodded, still suspicious, and guided Robert to the back of the shop. They passed through narrow aisles filled with stacked auto parts, old tires, and tools hanging on the walls. Everything smelled of grease, oil, and the sweat of honest work. To Robert, that environment was almost alien. He lived in climate-controlled offices with designer furniture and artwork on the walls. Here, luxury was having enough space to work. Anthony Smith was sitting in a plastic chair, analyzing an invoice when the two entered. He looked up and, seeing the man in the impeccable suit beside his son, he frowned. "Can I help you?" Robert extended his hand. "My name is Robert Miller. I'm the owner of Miller Motors, and I'm also the guy your son saved from making a total fool of himself yesterday on Fifth Avenue." Anthony shook Robert's hand firmly but didn't smile. He was cautious by nature. He had seen people with money show up with empty promises before. "I saw the video. Half the country saw the video. What do you want here?" Robert took a deep breath. "Look, I know you have no reason to trust me. I know I wasn't polite to your son yesterday. In fact, I was arrogant, overbearing, and ridiculous. But I came here because I want to do something right. I want to help, for real." Anthony crossed his arms, his gaze still wary. "Help how? With money?" "Oh, with charity. Because we don't need handouts, Mr. Miller. We work hard here and support ourselves with dignity." Robert shook his head. "It's not charity. It's recognition. Your son has a rare talent. He managed to fix a car that even the mechanics at my own plant couldn't diagnose that fast. He deserves better opportunities than working in a shop without proper resources. I'm not saying the work here isn't valuable, but I'm saying he can go further, and I want to help with that." Luke, standing beside his father, looked at Robert with a mixture of hope and fear. "But what do you want in return?" The question caught Robert by surprise. He hadn't thought about an exchange. For the first time in decades, he was acting without calculating a financial return, without thinking of profit, without tracing marketing strategies. He was acting because something inside him demanded it. "Nothing, Luke. I don't want anything in return. I just want to do what's right. Because if I had done that earlier in my life, maybe a lot of things would be different today." The silence that followed was heavy. Anthony looked at his son, then at Robert, trying to decipher if there was sincerity there, or just another move by a powerful man trying to clean his own image. But there was something in Robert's eyes that made him hesitate. There was pain there. There was regret. There was something human that Anthony didn't expect to find. "You lost someone, didn't you?" Anthony asked softly. Robert swallowed hard. "I lost my son 5 years ago. He was Luke's age, and since then I've been living on autopilot. I work, I make money, I close deals, but I don't really live. Yesterday, when I saw your son working, when I saw his courage, his intelligence, his humility, I saw everything I am not, and I saw everything my son could have become. I can't bring my son back, but I can do something for another boy who deserves a chance, if you'll let me." Anthony felt a pang in his chest. He was a father. He understood that pain even without having lived it. He understood what it was to look at a son and want to protect him from all the dangers of the world. And he understood, too, what it was to recognize that alone he couldn't give the boy everything he deserved. Luke was brilliant. Luke deserved to study, to specialize, to grow. And Anthony knew deep down that this was an opportunity that might never appear again. "What exactly are you proposing?" Anthony asked, still cautious but with a softer voice. Robert looked around at the modest shop, the old tools, the cramped space. "First, I want to invest here. New equipment, proper tools, a renovation of the space. You'll be able to work better and serve more customers. Second, I want to ensure Luke has access to a top-tier education. Private school, technical courses, everything he needs to develop his talent. And third, I want you to know this isn't a favor, it's an investment, because I believe Luke will one day do incredible things, and I want to have been a part of that." Luke looked at his father, his eyes shining. "Dad, we can accept. We can improve everything here. We can grow." Anthony rubbed his face, thoughtful. He didn't want to accept help from the outside. There was pride in that, a pride he had carried forever. But there was also love. Love for his son. And true love, he knew, sometimes meant swallowing one's pride and accepting an outstretched hand when it appeared. "All right, we accept, but on one condition. No media, no turning this into publicity. If you're doing this because it's right, then do it because it's right, not because you want to clean your image." Robert agreed immediately. "Consider it done. This stays between us." They shook hands again, but this time with more firmness, with more trust. Robert felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Purpose. He wasn't there to make money, to close a contract, or to increase profits. He was there to make a difference in someone's life. And that, he discovered, was worth more than any figure on a financial balance sheet. In the days that followed, Robert began to act. He hired a renovation company to modernize the shop, bought new, high-quality equipment, and ensured Anthony had everything he needed to expand his services. He also enrolled Luke in an elite technical school specializing in mechanical engineering, where the boy could learn in a structured way everything he already knew intuitively. And most importantly, Robert began to visit the shop regularly, not as a boss inspecting an investment, but as someone who genuinely cared. He and Luke talked at length. The businessman listened to the boy's stories, his dreams of one day designing better, safer, more accessible cars. He also listened to Anthony's stories, who told of the years of struggle, the jobs refused, the doors closed for lack of a diploma. And each story stung Robert like a sharp blade, because he knew his own company had hiring policies that excluded people like Anthony. Talented, dedicated people, but without the right papers. It was during one of these visits that Anthony told something that made Robert freeze. "Years ago, I applied for a mechanic position at Miller Motors. I knew everything about your cars, I had practical experience, I knew every system, but I was rejected. They said I didn't have recognized technical training. They said the company policy was to hire only professionals with official certifications. I never tried again. I stayed here in my shop, doing what I know how to do." Robert felt the weight of those words. He was indirectly responsible for that rejection. His company, his policies, his elitist worldview had closed the door on a talented man simply because he didn't have a stamped piece of paper. And now, years later, he was there, admiring that man's son, recognizing in him the talent that should have been recognized in the father. "I'm sorry, Anthony. Truly, I didn't know that. But now I do. And I'm going to change it. I'm going to change the company's policies. I'm going to open doors for people like you, people who have talent but didn't have the same opportunities others had." Anthony nodded but said nothing. He knew words were easy. Actions were what showed a person's character, and he hoped sincerely that Robert would keep that promise. Meanwhile, in another corner of the city, Mark Taylor watched everything from afar with growing irritation. He saw Robert drifting away from the business, wasting time on this social project that brought no immediate financial return. He saw his partner changing, becoming more human, less pragmatic, and that bothered him deeply, because Mark didn't believe in kindness. He believed in profit, and that whole project seemed like a threat to his own plans to take total control of Miller Motors. He needed to act, and he needed to act fast before Robert definitively moved away from the corporate world Mark dominated so well. The months that followed brought profound changes for everyone involved. Smith & Son Auto Repair was completely unrecognizable, transformed in an impressive way. The peeling walls had been painted with a durable, light-toned paint that better reflected natural light. The cracked concrete floor received a new industrial coating resistant to oils and chemicals, and state-of-the-art modern equipment gleamed impeccably under the white LED lights that replaced the old, flickering yellowish fluorescent bulbs. There was a new hydraulic lift installed in the center of the shop, a professional workbench complete with organizing drawers, automotive diagnostic computers connected to the internet, and even a small climate-controlled office where Anthony could assist customers with comfort and dignity. The physical transformation was evident, but the emotional transformation was even deeper. Anthony woke up every day before dawn, no longer out of anxiety or financial worry as before, but out of pure excitement to go to work. He could now easily serve twice as many customers as before, with much higher technical quality, operational efficiency, and personal satisfaction. The shop's fame grew exponentially through word of mouth, and with it the family's monthly income increased in a way he never imagined possible. For the first time in years since his wife had passed away, leaving him alone with Luke while he was still small, Anthony could finally sleep soundly, without worrying if he could pay the basic bills for the next month, without having to choose between buying food or paying the electricity bill. Luke, for his part, was flourishing in ways even he hadn't imagined possible. The technical school where Robert enrolled him was one of the most prestigious institutions in New York, located in a modern building in Greenwich Village, attended predominantly by young people from wealthy families who invested fortunes in their children's education from early childhood. At the beginning of his studies, Luke felt deeply out of place and insecure. His classmates arrived in cars with drivers, had the latest smartphones, wore imported designer clothes that cost the equivalent of a month's work at his father's shop, and spoke casually about international trips during vacations, sports cars they received from their parents as gifts, and advanced technologies Luke only knew through internet videos or technical manuals he studied alone at night. In the first few weeks he ate alone during lunch, sitting in an isolated corner of the large air-conditioned cafeteria, watching the groups that formed talk excitedly about subjects that seemed alien to him. There were moments when he wondered if he really belonged in that place, if it wouldn't be better to go back to the simplicity of the shop, where everything made sense, and he felt competent and valued. But when the practical classes actually began, when it was finally necessary to literally get his hands dirty and demonstrate real knowledge beyond the theory in books, Luke stood out in an absolutely impressive way that left teachers and students speechless. He solved complex automotive diagnostic problems that left other students completely confused and lost, dismantled entire engines with a natural ease that seemed almost supernatural, and intuitively understood complex hydraulic, electrical, and mechanical systems that others took weeks to minimally comprehend. The teachers quickly began to realize that there was someone truly special there, someone with a rare gift that transcended formal education. Professor Henry Adams, an experienced mechanical engineer in his 50s who had been teaching for decades, began to use Luke as an example in classes, asking him to demonstrate techniques for his peers and inviting him to participate in technical competitions between schools. Gradually, the very classmates who had previously ignored him began to seek him out, asking for help with difficult exercises, looking for tips for practical exams, and wanting to understand how he managed to make something look so easy that was so complicated for them. It was precisely this perception that caught the attention of an international engineering commission. One of Luke's teachers, Dr. Henry Adams, had worked years earlier at a technical university in Europe and maintained contacts with foreign educational institutions. He was so impressed with the boy's talent that he sent a detailed report on his abilities to an exchange program for young talents in mechanical engineering. The response came in less than a month. Luke had been selected to participate in a 2-year study program in London, with everything paid for, including housing, food, and a monthly scholarship. When the news arrived, Luke was at the shop helping his father change the oil on a truck. Anthony read the letter in silence, reread it twice, and then looked at his son with an expression that mixed pride and something like panic. "They want you in London, son, 2 years, everything paid for, an opportunity that doesn't come twice, in a lifetime." Luke took the letter from his father's hands, read it quickly and felt his heart race. London, 2 years, far from home, far from his father, far from everything he knew. The initial happiness was quickly replaced by a tightness in his chest. "But Dad, what about you and the shop? I can't leave you here alone." Anthony forced a smile, but Luke knew his father well enough to realize that the smile wasn't genuine. "Son, you can't let a chance like this pass because of me. I'll be fine. The shop is doing well. I need to go. You need to take advantage of it." But Anthony's voice trembled, and Luke knew why. They only had each other. Luke's mother had passed away when he was still small, leaving Anthony alone to raise the boy. During all those years they were father and son, but they were also partners, friends, and companions in struggle. The idea of being separated for so long was painful for both, even if neither wanted to admit it out loud. "I need to think, Dad. It's not an easy decision." Anthony nodded and went back to work, but his movements were slower, heavier. Luke noticed, and that hurt more than anything. That night, Luke talked to Robert about the proposal. The businessman was visiting the shop, as had become his custom, and when he heard about the exchange, his eyes lit up. "Luke, that's incredible. You have to go. It's a once-in-a-lifetime chance." But Luke hesitated. "What if my dad needs me? What if the shop can't handle it alone? What if he gets sick and I'm on the other side of the world?" Robert understood immediately. He knew exactly what that fear was because he himself had felt something similar when he lost Gabriel. The fear of being away, of not being able to protect, of not being present when they were needed most. "Luke, I understand your concern, but your father is strong. He'll be fine, and you can help him better in the future if you develop yourself now. Besides, I'll be here. I'll look after the shop. I'll ensure your father has all the support he needs. You have my word." Luke looked at Robert, searching for sincerity in those eyes, and he found it. But even so, the doubt remained. He spent the following weeks tormented by the decision. He wanted to go, he wanted to learn, he wanted to grow, but he didn't want to abandon his father. While Luke struggled with his internal dilemma, Mark Taylor accelerated his own plans. He had observed Robert drifting further and further away from the automaker's business, spending more time on that social project than in board meetings. That, to Mark, was unacceptable, and more than that, it was an opportunity. If Robert continued to step away, Mark could take total control of the company, but for that he needed to discredit his partner, undermine his reputation, and turn him into someone irresponsible in the eyes of the shareholders. Mark's first move was subtle. He hired an external auditing firm, claiming it was necessary to review the company's recent expenses. And he discreetly guided the auditors to investigate especially the investments Robert had made in Anthony's shop. The idea was simple. Make it look like Robert was diverting company resources for personal projects, benefiting a specific family without technical criteria or proper financial justification. The audit began in a seemingly routine and professional manner. Tax documents were formally requested through stamped official letters. Detailed technical questions were asked in recorded meetings. And Anthony, who had always been an honest man but not necessarily bureaucratically organized, began to feel a growing and suffocating pressure he wasn't prepared to face. He received official summonses to document the exact origin of every new piece of equipment installed in the shop, to technically justify every renovation performed by presenting plans and permits, and to meticulously present old invoices he hadn't always kept properly because he never imagined he would need such formal documentation. The relentless bureaucracy suffocated him progressively like a net tightening around him. And for the first time since that transformative day Robert first appeared in his life, offering genuine help, Anthony began to seriously wonder if all that help hadn't actually been a terrible mistake, if it wouldn't have been better to stay small and invisible, but safe and free from legal complications. He spent entire nights awake in the simple bed of his small room, staring at the cracked ceiling, rummaging through old dusty papers kept in shoeboxes, desperately trying to organize an informal accounting that had never needed to be formal before. He saw his son also losing sleep, worried, studying less to help him look for lost documents, and that broke his heart in ways no previous financial difficulty ever had. At the same time, as part of a coordinated strategy, anonymous profiles with thousands of followers on busy social media platforms systematically began to spread carefully constructed malicious rumors. Elaborate posts with persuasive language insistently suggested that the touching viral video of the car stalled on Fifth Avenue had actually been a calculated corporate viral marketing stunt. They claimed Luke was nothing more than a professional child actor hired by a specialized agency. That Robert Miller was cynically using the fabricated story of the poor boy to strategically clean his corporate public image after some serious financial scandal that was supposedly about to come to light in investigative media. The absurd conspiracy theories multiplied virally with frightening speed, each more elaborate and convincing than the last. And the public, always naturally hungry for controversy and scandals involving celebrities and public figures, began to massively believe and share without questioning. Luke saw the cruel comments. He read the baseless accusations line by line. He felt the deep, searing pain of being publicly called a pathological liar, a calculating opportunist, and a manipulated puppet of an unscrupulous businessman using children for marketing. He consciously tried to ignore it, repeating to himself that he knew the truth and that should be enough, but it was psychologically very difficult. Every anonymous mean comment was like a violent punch to the stomach. And worst of all was that some people close to him, people he considered acquaintances or even friends, visibly began to look at him differently, suspiciously, questioningly. Classmates at the technical school made mean jokes in the hallways as he passed. Old neighbors in Brooklyn whispered in the street corners. Distrust spread rapidly, like an uncontrollable fire in dry straw. Anthony also dramatically felt the weight of the organized smear campaign. Long-time loyal customers began to directly question whether the story was true. Some abruptly cancelled scheduled services without a clear explanation. Others arrived tense at the renovated shop with extremely uncomfortable and direct questions, wanting to know by looking him in the eye if it was true that everything had been carefully staged, if his son was really a paid actor, if Robert was truly that kind, or if there were obscure hidden interests behind so much apparent generosity. The solid reputation Anthony had patiently built over decades of hard, honest, and dedicated work was being mercilessly shredded in a matter of weeks by fabricated lies spread deliberately by people he didn't even know and who had absolutely nothing against him other than serving the interests of those who paid them. Robert clearly perceived what was happening by observing the subtle changes in Anthony and Luke's behavior during his regular visits to the shop, and he became absolutely furious with a rage that burned inside. He knew with absolute certainty that this was in no way accidental or a statistical coincidence. Someone with resources and influence was deliberately orchestrating that coordinated smear campaign, and he had a strong, well-founded suspicion of exactly who was responsible. Mark. It had to be Mark. He knew his partner well enough to recognize his fingerprints on that type of dirty operation that mixed institutional legal pressure with public opinion, manipulation on social media. It was Mark's characteristic style, acting in the shadows, using third parties as a shield, never directly dirtying his own hands, but always reaping the benefits of the created chaos. Robert decided he needed to directly confront his partner, face to face, eye to eye, without intermediaries or witnesses. He summoned Mark to an urgent private meeting in his executive office at the Miller Motors headquarters, a large room on the top floor with a panoramic view of the city. When Mark entered with his impeccable Armani suit and that characteristic arrogant smile on his thin lips, Robert didn't waste time with protocol or preliminary small talk. "You're behind all this, aren't you, Mark?" Robert asked directly, his voice deliberately low, but absolutely loaded with contained rage that threatened to explode at any moment. "Don't bother denying it. I've known you for too long. I recognize your way of operating. The forged audit, the anonymous profiles on social media, the elaborate conspiracy theories. It all has your DNA on it. Why are you doing this? Why are you trying to destroy an innocent family?" Mark sat comfortably in the leather chair in front of Robert's executive desk, crossed his legs with calculated elegance, and smiled that cold, characteristic smile that never reached his eyes. Behind what exactly, Robert? A simple, perfectly legitimate and necessary routine audit. Ordinary people on social media legitimately questioning a story that, let's be intellectually honest, seems too good to be true. Let's be realistic here. A millionaire businessman is saved by a 12-year-old poor boy in the middle of Fifth Avenue, and it goes viral instantly, and coincidentally you decide to invest heavily in that specific family right after. You really don't see how that might look suspicious to outside observers. I don't control the internet, my dear friend. I don't control what people think or share spontaneously. I'm just zealously protecting the legitimate financial interests of the company we built together. Something you, by the way, seem to have conveniently forgotten to do lately." Robert clenched his fists so hard his knuckles audibly cracked, his jaw muscles visibly tightened. "You know perfectly well that story is absolutely true, Mark. You know I'm doing the right thing, the morally correct thing, helping people who genuinely deserve an opportunity in life. But you can't stand to see it, can you? You can't psychologically bear witnessing someone doing something good in the world without expecting an immediate financial return, because it makes you realize something deeply uncomfortable about yourself, that you've never done anything truly good in your entire life that wasn't exclusively to line your own pockets or increase your personal power. You don't have a shred of empathy, no compassion, no soul. You're empty inside, and that eats away at you silently every day, doesn't it?" Mark stood up abruptly from the chair, the smile finally disappearing completely from his face like a falling mask. His eyes narrowed dangerously. "Be very careful what you say, Robert. You may be the historical founder of this company, yes, you may have your name on the building, but I have considerable concrete influence over the majority shareholders. I have relationships built over years. I have strategic allies on the board. And if you stubbornly continue with this pathetic midlife crisis of yours, if you insist on wasting corporate resources on sentimental social projects that don't generate measurable returns, you'll quickly find that this company can function perfectly well without you. In fact, it might even function better. Have you thought about that?" The veiled threat hung heavily in the air-conditioned room like a dark cloud before a storm. Robert stared at Mark for long seconds in absolute silence, processing those words, evaluating the depth of the betrayal, measuring the size of the moral abyss that separated the two men who had once been confident partners working side by side to build a shared business dream. And in that moment of crystal-clear clarity, Robert finally fully understood something he should have realized long ago. There had never been genuine friendship there. There had never been true partnership based on shared values. There was only temporary mutual interest, strategic convenience, and shared profit as long as their personal goals coincided. And now that their paths fundamentally diverged, Mark wouldn't hesitate for a single second to destroy him if it meant gaining more power and absolute control. The threat remained suspended in the air. Robert left that tense meeting, knowing with absolute certainty that he was officially in an open war. It was no longer just a professional matter of generously helping Luke and Anthony. It was no longer simply about doing good in the world and finding personal redemption through genuine charity. It was much deeper now. It was fundamentally an existential question of defending his own moral integrity as a human being, of publicly proving his intentions were genuine and not calculated corporate image manipulation, of concretely protecting those good people who had naively trusted him against the sharp claws of an unscrupulous corporate predator. He needed to act. He needed to act fast, and he needed to be strategically smart. Robert drove immediately to Brooklyn that same rainy afternoon, completely ignoring other professional appointments on his packed executive calendar. When he arrived at the renovated shop, he found Anthony sitting alone in the small makeshift office in the back, surrounded by disorganized piles of old papers, documents yellowed by time, and torn invoices, his head resting in his calloused hands in a gesture of absolute physical and emotional exhaustion. The man who had always seemed so strong, so resilient, so unshakable in the face of life's adversities now seemed visibly broken, defeated, crushed by the weight of a relentless bureaucracy he didn't fully understand and a public smear he didn't know how to effectively combat. "Anthony," Robert said softly, knocking lightly on the half-open door. "May I come in?" Anthony slowly raised his head, revealing red, tired eyes that seemed to have aged 10 years in a few weeks. "Mr. Miller, come in, please. Sorry for the mess. I'm trying to organize all these papers for the audit, but it's so many documents they want that I don't even know where to start anymore. I think I never should have accepted your help. I'm not prepared for all this. I'm not a man of offices, bureaucracy, or paperwork. I'm just a simple mechanic who knows how to fix cars." Robert sat in an old plastic chair beside Anthony and placed his hand firmly on his shoulder in a gesture of fraternal solidarity. "Listen carefully, Anthony. I know exactly who is behind all this. I know who orchestrated this forged audit, who hired those anonymous profiles on social media, who is spreading these cruel lies. And I solemnly promise you, looking into your eyes, that I will prove the truth. I will find a concrete way to publicly expose this miserable man and protect you and your son. You are not going back to being socially invisible. You are not going to be destroyed because of my attempt to do what is right. I will not allow it, not this time, never again." Anthony looked at Robert with a complex mixture of gratitude, fear, and fragile hope fighting inside him. "But what if it doesn't work, Mr. Miller? What if this man is more powerful than we think? What if, in the end, we lose everything we've achieved so far and are still left with a tarnished reputation we can never clean?" Robert squeezed Anthony's shoulder harder, looking directly into his eyes with unwavering determination. "It won't happen, Anthony. I won't let it. Trust me. Just a little longer, please." At that dramatic moment, Luke entered the cramped office straight from the technical school, still wearing his impeccable navy blue uniform, his heavy backpack slung over one shoulder. He immediately sensed the palpable tension in the air, saw his father's red eyes, the papers scattered chaotically across the desk, and Robert's serious and worried expression. And something inside him finally broke, something that had been building up for weeks. "Mr. Robert," Luke said, his voice firm but loaded with contained emotion that threatened to overflow. "Dad, I've decided. I'm not going to London. Not now. Not with all this happening around us. I can't simply run away to the other side of the world while you're here suffering, fighting against lies, defending our honor. My place is here, beside my father, helping to defend what is ours, what we built together with so much effort and sacrifice." Anthony stood up abruptly from the old chair, alarmed. "Luke, no. Don't do that. Don't throw away a unique opportunity like this because of me. You can't sacrifice your bright future because of temporary problems that we'll solve one way or another." But Luke shook his head with a determination that admitted no counter-arguments. "It's not a sacrifice, Dad. It's a conscious choice. It's loyalty. It's love. You did this for me your whole life, giving up your own dreams to ensure I had mine. Now it's my turn to be by your side when you need me most. London can wait, my family can't." Robert looked at that 12-year-old boy demonstrating a courage and loyalty that many adults didn't possess, and he saw in him everything Gabriel could have been if he had had the chance to grow and mature. He saw courage. He saw integrity. He saw genuine and unconditional love. He saw everything he himself should have been years ago, when he still had time to make different choices, to value what really mattered, to be present in the moments that defined relationships and lives. And at that precise moment of absolute emotional clarity, Robert silently swore to himself that he would do absolutely everything in his power to ensure that family didn't pay the terrible price of his own personal search for redemption and meaning. He needed to act immediately. He needed to find concrete and irrefutable proof. He needed to unmask Mark publicly before it was too late and irreparable damage was caused, and he knew exactly where to start his search for the truth. There was a discreet accountant who had been working for years at Miller Motors, an upright man named Frank Cooper, who had always visibly shown moral discomfort with certain questionable company practices over time. Robert knew Frank had privileged access to extremely sensitive confidential information, and if Mark was really planning something big and illegal, if he was diverting corporate resources or forging official documents as Robert strongly suspected, Frank would surely know something important. He had to. It was literally his job to monitor financial movements and money flows within the company. It was absolutely time to have a frank, direct, and honest conversation with Frank. It was time to finally discover the complete truth, because Robert was no longer willing to lose. Not this time, not again, never again in his life. Frank Cooper was not a man who liked conflict. During his 22 years working at Miller Motors, he had always preferred to keep his head down, do his job efficiently, and go home without getting involved in corporate intrigue. He was the type of professional bosses loved because he was competent, discreet, and invisible. He arrived early, left late, met deadlines, and avoided controversy. But there was a problem. Frank had a conscience, and in recent months, that conscience had been weighing on his chest like a stone, preventing him from sleeping properly, stealing his appetite, and making him look at his 12-year-old daughter during breakfast and wonder what kind of example he was being for her. When Robert appeared at his office door at the automaker's headquarters, Frank felt his heart race. He knew that moment would come. He knew that sooner or later he would have to choose a side. And now, looking at the company's founder, at the man who seemed genuinely concerned about something beyond profits and stocks, Frank realized his choice had been made a long time ago. He was just waiting for the courage to act. "Mr. Miller, I was expecting you to show up," Frank said. His voice low, almost a whisper loaded with tension. He stood up quickly, carefully closed the office door, and pulled the curtains on the glass window that faced the busy hallway of the company. He didn't want witnesses. Not yet. "We need to talk. And what I'm going to tell you could change a lot. It could change everything, actually." Robert sat in the chair across from Frank's desk, his body tense, his shoulders rigid, his hands clasped in his lap. He sensed the seriousness in the accountant's tone, saw the nervousness in his gestures, and it made him even more alert. "I'm listening, Frank. Go ahead." Frank opened a drawer locked with a key he carried in his pocket, pulled out a bulky folder filled with documents organized with colored clips and numbered labels, and placed it on the desk with care, like someone handling evidence of a crime. "6 months ago, Mr. Taylor approached me with a proposal. He said he needed my help to protect the company from an imminent crisis. According to him, you were diverting corporate resources to benefit personal projects, specifically that mechanic shop and the family of the boy who fixed your car. He wanted me to create documents that proved this, altered financial reports, forged bank movements, invented technical justifications, all to present to the shareholders and force your removal from the presidency." Robert clenched his fists so hard his knuckles turned white. He felt rage rising in his throat like hot lava, but he forced himself to stay calm. "Continue, Frank. Tell me everything." Frank took a deep breath, as if he were diving before jumping off a cliff. "I refused at first. I said it wasn't ethical, that I wouldn't do it, that my role was to ensure the financial transparency of the company, not to manufacture lies. But he insisted. He said it was for the greater good, that you were losing focus, that the shareholders were worried about the direction the company was taking, that your obsession with social projects was compromising profits. I kept refusing. Then he changed strategy. He threatened me, Mr. Miller. He said he had information about old irregularities, technical errors I made when I was still learning the company's accounting system in the early years. Technical mistakes, nothing intentional, but they could be interpreted as negligence or even fraud if presented the right way. He said he would incriminate me, destroy my career, and ensure I never worked anywhere again. And I believed him, because I knew Mark. I knew what he was capable of. Robert felt a mixture of anger and something like compassion. He saw the weight of guilt on Frank's shoulders, saw the suffering of that man who had been forced to choose between his ethics and his survival. "And did you accept?" Frank lowered his head, ashamed. "I accepted, but not the way he wanted. I created the fake documents he asked for, yes, but at the same time I kept copies of everything. I kept the true originals. I also kept all the emails he sent me with detailed instructions, all the explicit orders for forgery. I recorded phone conversations where he discussed strategies to discredit you. I documented suspicious bank transfers. I documented everything, Mr. Miller, because I knew that one day this would come back to haunt me. And I preferred to have a way to defend myself. I preferred to be able to prove that I was being coerced, that I didn't act of my own free will, that I tried to resist as much as I could." Robert looked at the bulky folder on the desk and felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Hope that truth still mattered, that justice was still possible, and that good people still existed, even amidst corporate chaos and business pressures. "You have all that in there?" Frank nodded and began to systematically open the folder, organizing the documents into piles on the desk. "I have everything. Emails from Mark, specifically ordering the creation of fake documents with dates, times, and detailed instructions. Audio recordings of private meetings where he openly discusses strategies to discredit you and take control of the company. Contracts signed with digital marketing firms specialized in smear campaigns on social media. Receipts for payments to anonymous profiles to spread fake news about you and the boy. And more, Mr. Miller. Much more. I discovered that Mark has been involved in a scheme to divert resources from the automaker itself that has been going on for at least 5 years. He created shell companies registered in the names of front men, companies that provide overpriced services to Miller Motors and pockets the difference through offshore accounts. I have the complete bank records, the fraudulent contracts, the forged invoices, everything. He diverted millions, Mr. Miller. Millions that should have been invested in research, development, and improvements for the employees. And he used it all to enrich himself at the expense of the company you built." Robert looked at that mountain of evidence and felt the weight of reality falling on him like an avalanche. He had built that company from scratch, dedicated decades of his life, sacrificed time with his family, and lost precious moments with Gabriel by always working, always seeking growth, and always chasing success. And now he discovered that a man he trusted, a partner he considered a friend, was destroying everything from the inside like a silent termite eating away at the structures of a house. The anger he felt was immense, almost suffocating, but along with it came something more powerful. Determination. Determination to seek justice, to protect what he built, and to defend Luke and Anthony from the claws of that greedy man. "Why are you telling me this now, Frank? Why not sooner?" The accountant looked at Robert with tired eyes, the eyes of someone who had carried a heavy secret for too long. "Because I saw the video of that boy fixing your car that afternoon on Fifth Avenue. I saw his courage, his humility, his competence. I also saw the way people reacted, how it touched millions of hearts across the country. And then I saw the smear campaign starting. I saw anonymous profiles on social media spreading lies about that boy, calling him a liar, an opportunist, and a hired actor. I saw a talented and honest boy being publicly destroyed by greed and envy. And I couldn't live with that on my conscience anymore, Mr. Miller. I simply couldn't, because I have a daughter you know. She's 12, the same age as that boy. And every time I looked at her, I wondered what kind of father I was, what kind of man I was if I stayed silent while an innocent child was attacked that way. So I decided I needed to do the right thing, even if it cost me my job, even if it brought me trouble, because I want my daughter to grow up in a world where doing the right thing still matters, where good people still have a chance to win, where the truth still matters more than money. Robert felt a lump in his throat. He reached across the desk and shook Frank's hand firmly, with genuine gratitude. "Thank you, Frank. You don't know how much this means. Not just to me, but to that boy and his father. You're saving lives with this courage. And I promise you, I swear to you, you won't regret doing the right thing. I'll protect you. I'll ensure you don't face any retaliation. And more than that, I'll ensure your courage is recognized." Frank smiled for the first time since the conversation began. It was a sad smile, loaded with relief, but also with hope. "I already don't regret it, Mr. Miller. On the contrary, I feel lighter than I've felt in months, because now I can look at my daughter and know I did what was right. I just hope all this helps that boy and his family. They deserve it." Robert left that office with the bulky folder under his arm and an iron determination burning in his chest like a live ember. He knew exactly what he needed to do. The next steps were clear in his mind, like a detailed script. First, he sought out Richard Miller, a renowned criminal lawyer who had worked on high-profile corporate corruption cases. He handed over all the evidence, explained the situation in minute detail, and asked Richard to prepare a solid legal strategy to expose Mark and legally protect the company from possible retaliation. Then he called an extraordinary shareholders meeting, something that hadn't happened at Miller Motors in more than 10 years. The summons was formal, serious, and loaded with urgency. And finally, he prepared himself emotionally for the confrontation he knew was coming. The assembly took place on a rainy Thursday morning, the New York sky heavy and grey like molten lead. The conference room on the top floor of the automaker's headquarters was packed. Majority and minority shareholders, directors from all areas, members of the board of directors, external auditors, lawyers, everyone was present. The tension in the air was palpable, thick as fog. Mark Taylor was sitting in his leather chair, his legs crossed with calculated arrogance, a confident smile on his thin lips. He thought that meeting would be another opportunity to undermine Robert's credibility, to plant seeds of doubt in the shareholders, and to strengthen his position of power. But when Robert began to speak, when the first images appeared on the giant screen that covered the entire back wall of the room, Mark's smile began to melt like ice under the scorching midday sun. Robert didn't waste time with preambles. He went straight to the point, projecting enlarged emails on the screen, showing lines highlighted in yellow where Mark explicitly ordered the forgery of accounting documents. He read excerpts aloud, slowly, letting each word weigh in the room like stones falling into still water. Then he played audio recordings, phone conversations where Mark openly discussed with external accomplices strategies to spread lies on social media, to hire digital trolls, and to manufacture conspiracy theories involving the viral video. Mark's voice echoed through the conference room via the speakers built into the ceiling, clear, unmistakable, incriminating. Then came the bank records, suspicious transfers of astronomical amounts to offshore accounts, fraudulent contracts with shell companies, and overpriced invoices for services that were never rendered. It was all there, exposed, undeniable, devastating. The evidence was absolutely irrefutable. There was no room for doubt, for alternative interpretations, or for contradictory versions. The emails clearly showed Mark's orders to forge documents aimed at incriminating Robert. The recordings revealed conversations where he planned to take total control of the company through systematic manipulation, veiled blackmail, and calculated reputational destruction. And the bank records proved without a shadow of a doubt the resource diversion scheme that had been going on silently for at least 5 years, corroding the company from within like an undetected cancer. The room fell into absolute silence as Robert finished the presentation. A heavy, awkward silence, loaded with shock and indignation. "Shareholders, what you are seeing here is not just a petty attempt to discredit me personally. It is much more serious than that. It is a deliberate and premeditated attempt to destroy an innocent family, to ruin the life of a talented child, all to cover up very serious corporate crimes that have cost this company millions of dollars over the years." Mark Taylor not only tried to sabotage a legitimate social project that has the potential to transform lives and change this company's image positively, but he also systematically diverted financial resources from Miller Motors, resources that should have been invested in research and development, in improving our employees' working conditions, and in technological innovation that would ensure our competitiveness in the international market. He betrayed the trust of all of us. He betrayed this company that welcomed him and gave him opportunities, and he tried to destroy an innocent child in the process. I have all the necessary evidence here to criminally prosecute this man and recover every cent he stole from us. Your decision now is very simple and direct. Either we immediately remove this man from all his executive and shareholder functions in this company and restructure our corporate governance based on rigorous ethics and absolute transparency, or I immediately resign as president and personally take all this evidence straight to the district attorney and to the country's main media outlets. The choice is yours. There was no debate, there was no discussion. The vote was unanimous and immediate. Mark Taylor was formally removed from all his executive functions in the company, had his shares judicially frozen until the final resolution of the criminal process that would be initiated, and was officially notified that he would respond legally for his acts in both the criminal and civil spheres. He left that meeting room as pale as paper, his hands trembling visibly, his face covered in cold sweat, knowing deep down that his business career had ended, definitively and irreversibly. He had bet everything on a risky power play and had lost spectacularly. And Robert, watching that defeated man walk dejectedly out the door, felt something that wasn't exactly happiness in the traditional sense, but perhaps true justice. Justice for Luke, for Anthony, for Frank, and for all those who had been harmed by the unrestrained greed and blind ambition of men like Mark. In the following days, the truth began to emerge publicly like water springing from a dammed source. One of the major New York newspapers, after receiving detailed information directly from Robert's legal team, published an extensive front-page story about the entire case, revealing in rich detail Mark's ingenious scheme, the devastating evidence presented in the closed assembly, and Robert's resounding victory over the dark forces that tried to destroy both his reputation and the life of an innocent family. The story also told with journalistic sensitivity the complete real story of Luke and Anthony, showing through exclusive interviews and moving photos that there was no staging, no orchestrated manipulation, just genuine talent flourishing amidst adversity, and a rare opportunity that finally arose at the right time. Social media, the same platforms that weeks before were flooded with defamatory fake news and malicious conspiracy theories, now quickly filled with sincere apologies. People who had impulsively shared lies now shared the truth with the same fervor. Digital influencers who had mocked Luke now recorded emotional videos acknowledging their error and asking for public forgiveness. And Luke, that boy who had been unjustly called a liar, an opportunist and a hired actor, was now finally seen by the entire country as what he had really always been, an innocent victim of a cruel conspiracy orchestrated by corporate greed and unmeasured ambition. The positive fallout was absolutely massive, surpassing all expectations. Other major companies in the automotive sector began to seek out Anthony, offering interesting strategic partnerships, specialized service contracts, and expansion opportunities he never imagined possible. Top-tier technical schools, renowned universities and technological institutes offered Luke full scholarships, publicly recognizing his exceptional talent and brilliant potential. And Miller Motors, now operating under a new, rigorously ethical administrative management and with completely reformulated corporate policies, publicly announced through an institutional campaign that it would start valuing practical competence and real experience as much as traditional academic training in all its future selection processes. It was a seemingly small change in human resources policy, but symbolically gigantic and deeply significant. And Robert knew intimately with absolute certainty that it was only the beginning of a much larger transformation to come. With the shop finally free from suffocating legal pressures and devastating public defamation, Anthony could finally focus fully on what really mattered to him: honest work and a united family. The demand for the shop's specialized services grew exponentially in a matter of weeks. People came from distant neighborhoods in Queens, from the Upper West Side, and even from neighboring cities in Jersey, just to personally see the historic place where that whole extraordinary story had begun. And Anthony, always maintaining that genuine humility that characterized him, received all visitors with the same respectful courtesy and unwavering dedication as always, without ever letting the sudden fame go to his head or change his hard-working essence. Luke, for his part, now faced the most difficult decision of his young life. The tempting proposal for an academic exchange in London was still firmly on the table, awaiting only his final confirmation. The prestigious European institutions had closely followed the whole controversy through international media and reiterated the invitation with even more enthusiasm, making it crystal clear that the special spot was exclusively his whenever he felt ready to depart. But now, with the storm finally calmed, with the shop completely financially stable and his father emotionally secure, Luke finally felt he could really go. Not without searing pain, not without anticipated longing, but with the inner certainty that he was making the most correct choice for his future and to honor all the sacrifices his father had made for him over the years. On the night before his international trip, Luke and Anthony sat together side by side in the small, modest living room of the simple house they shared in Brooklyn. It was a humble environment, with old furniture inherited from relatives, a worn-out sofa with patched upholstery, and walls that urgently needed a new coat of paint. But that space was absolutely filled with precious memories accumulated over years of living together, filled with unconditional love, with shared struggle, with victories won together. "Dad, I'm going to miss you every single day I'm away, really," Luke said, his voice choked with contained emotion, his eyes shining wetly under the yellowish light of the old ceiling lamp. Anthony firmly held his son's calloused hand between his own hands marked by decades of work. "And I'm going to miss you too, son, every second of every day. But I'm also going to feel an immense pride, a pride that doesn't fit in my chest, a deep pride in knowing that my son is conquering the world out there, that he is going much further than I ever managed to go with my own legs. And that, Luke, that is worth any longing. It's worth any distance. It's worth any sacrifice. Because you are fulfilling the dream I could never fulfill," they hugged. Tightly, very tightly, as if they wanted to physically engrave that moment in their body memory forever. And in that tight embrace, there was absolutely everything a father and a son could feel when life forces them to separate temporarily so that both can grow. A painful goodbye, deep gratitude, unconditional love, fear of the unknown, and radiant hope for the future. At the busy JFK International Airport the following morning, Robert was punctually there to personally say goodbye to Luke. He hugged the boy with genuine strength, with fatherly affection, and said, looking deep into his eyes, "You are going to do absolutely incredible things out there, kid, things that will change the world. And when you come back home, I want you to know with total certainty that you will always have a special place waiting for you here, in the company, in the renovated shop, wherever you want to be, because you are not just technically talented, you are living proof that solid character and personal integrity are worth infinitely more than any diploma hanging on a wall or any important last name carried on a passport." Luke smiled emotionally, gripping the straps of the backpack on his back. "Thank you for absolutely everything, Mr. Miller. You completely transformed my life and my father's life. We will never forget it." Robert shook his head with sincere humility. "No, Luke. It was you two who transformed my life first. You brutally reminded me of what really matters in this world. You taught me things I had completely forgotten. You made me become truly human again." The end. Dear listeners, we sincerely hope that the moving story of Robert, Luke, and Anthony has touched your heart as deeply as it touched ours while creating this narrative. If you were genuinely moved by this intense journey of personal transformation, regained humility, triumphant justice, and deserved second chances, leave your like right now on this video, subscribe immediately to our channel so you don't miss any powerful stories like this that we publish regularly, and tell us in detail in the comments which specific moment marked you the most emotionally. Was it the initial encounter on Fifth Avenue when it all began? The painful revelation about the loss of Gabriel? The dramatic confrontation in the assembly with Mark, the discovery of the evidence by Frank, or perhaps the touching farewell at the airport. We genuinely want to know exactly what you felt while listening to each chapter. Every day, without exception, we bring you intense, authentic, and true stories that reveal the deepest and most complex side of the human soul. Real stories that constantly remind us that radical change is always possible when we have enough courage to look honestly inside ourselves and at others with genuine generosity and true empathy. We look forward to seeing you in the next episode with another powerful narrative that will deeply move you and completely transform your day.